Boeing and Airbus have controlled the skies for decades, but the day Air China signed a deal for the new COMAC C929, everything changed. With China set to surpass the US as the world's top aviation market, and a state-backed jet suddenly threatening Western dominance, a billion-dollar power struggle has begun. But how did a secretive, crisis-born jet provoke such panic, and what could it mean for the future of global aviation? Boeing's dominance in China's wide-body market has always rested on the 787 Dreamliner. Since the first Chinese delivery in 2013, over 110 Dreamliners have joined the fleets of China Southern, Air China, Hainan, Xiamen, and others. At its peak, China accounted for up to 1 in every 5 Dreamliners flying worldwide. For years, Boeing's order book counted on Chinese airlines. At one point, 80 outstanding orders, with more than $20 billion in future deliveries on the line. Even in 2025, nearly 60 Dreamliners remain on order for Chinese carriers, representing almost a fifth of Boeing's global 787 backlog. But that once steady pipeline has sputtered. Delivery delays stretched for nearly 29 months after 2020, as regulatory and political tensions froze shipments. Only a dozen Dreamliners reached China between 2023 and 2025, far short of the expected pace. Airlines like China Southern and Hainan have quietly deferred or canceled a growing share of their future orders, citing both uncertainty and shifting strategic priorities. Internal risk assessments at Boeing now flag China as the single largest exposure in their wide-body business. No other country comes close in terms of lost sales if relations sour. The numbers are stark. Dreamliners make up about a quarter of China's entire wide-body fleet, outnumbering even the Airbus A350. Each lost order means hundreds of millions in revenue gone, not just for Boeing, but for hundreds of suppliers across the US and allied economies. With China projected to need thousands of new wide-body jets by the early 2030s, the prospect of losing this market is no longer a distant threat. It's a present danger, felt in every missed delivery and every order left in limbo. Industry analysts warn that the arrival of a credible Chinese-built alternative, especially one with strong state backing, could tip the balance for good. Boeing's advantage has always been its ability to deliver reliable, globally certified jets at scale. But with delivery reliability now in question, and state-owned airlines under pressure to buy local, that edge is fading. Even incremental inroads by a domestic competitor could erode Boeing's position, threatening not just future sales, but the economic viability of the entire 787 program. The stakes in this contest are measured in billions, and the countdown has already begun. In the spring of 2014, as diplomatic relations between Russia and the West unraveled over Crimea, Russian aviation leaders found themselves locked out of the global aircraft market almost overnight. The sanctions that followed didn't just freeze bank accounts or ground a few flights. They cut Russia off from the wide-body jets that kept its international airlines aloft. Airbus and Boeing deliveries halted. Spare parts dried up. With no path to buy or support Western aircraft, Moscow faced a stark reality: either accept a shrinking presence in global aviation or find a new way forward. That year, a discreet summit convened in Sochi. Behind closed doors, senior Russian officials met with their Chinese counterparts, including figures from COMAC and Aviation, to chart a response. The result was a $2 billion joint venture, publicly announced as the CR929 project. The agreement was more than a handshake. It mapped out a plan to create a new, long-haul, wide-body jet, one that would challenge the dominance of Boeing and Airbus, and crucially, rely on neither for key technologies. The CR929 blueprint divided engineering tasks between the two countries. Russia's United Aircraft Corporation would bring its experience in airframe design and composites, shaped by decades of Soviet and post-Soviet aerospace projects. China's COMAC, flush with state funding and fresh from the ARJ21 and C919 programs, would lead systems integration, final assembly, and, eventually, global marketing. The intellectual property provisions were unusually strict, with both sides wary of being left exposed if global tensions worsened. Even the project's legal framework accounted for the possibility of deeper sanctions, outlining fallback plans if Western suppliers or certification authorities became inaccessible. Few details of the Sochi negotiations reached the public. Most of what is known comes from later press releases and rare interviews with involved engineers. What is clear, the CR929 was conceived not just as a commercial venture, but as a hedge against the geopolitical risks that had just upended Russia's aviation sector. For China, the project offered a shortcut to wide-body expertise and a chance to leapfrog decades of incremental progress. For Russia, it was a lifeline to keep its aerospace industry relevant at a time when Western doors were slamming shut. By late 2014, joint engineering teams had begun meeting in Shanghai and Moscow, sketching out a twin-aisle aircraft with the range and capacity to rival the 787 and A350. Both governments pledged top-level support, with state banks and municipal authorities channeling funds into the venture. The CR929 joint venture became a symbol of what could be accomplished when necessity and ambition converged, and it set the stage for a new challenger to the global duopoly. As the partnership advanced, the world's attention remained focused on the familiar giants. But within meeting rooms and design labs in China and Russia, a quiet race to rewrite the rules of the aviation industry had already begun. Russia's exit from the CR929 program in 2022 hit like a seismic shock. Overnight, the joint venture that once promised to challenge Boeing and Airbus lost half its engineering muscle and decades of wide-body experience. In Moscow, United Aircraft Corporation officials cited worsening sanctions, irreconcilable disagreements over program control, and an impossible path to international certification. In Shanghai, the mood among COMAC's leadership turned from cautious optimism to crisis management. Inside COMAC's headquarters, the atmosphere grew tense. Internal messages and leaked meeting notes from that spring describe a scramble to reassign senior engineers. Some called back from the C919 project, others pulled from composite materials labs across the country. The project's Russian partners had been responsible for key airframe design elements and advanced composite structures. Now those blueprints were suddenly off-limits, and the supply chain for dozens of critical systems was thrown into chaos. Industry analysts openly questioned whether the program could survive. Aviation blogs and Western trade journals published stories with headlines like CR929, Dead on Arrival, and China Alone, Can COMAC Deliver? The skepticism wasn't just external. Engineers inside COMAC reportedly adopted a rallying cry: China must finish what it started. But the technical hurdles were staggering. Every system previously planned with Russian suppliers, from landing gear to composite wing spars, had to be resourced or redesigned. Supplier negotiations stalled. International partners, already wary of secondary sanctions, hesitated to commit. Some Western firms quietly suspended talks, waiting to see if the program would even continue. The legal framework of the original joint venture, with its strict intellectual property provisions, left COMAC with limited access to Russian-developed technology. Even internal morale wavered. Reports from the period mention emergency meetings, round-the-clock work schedules, and a palpable sense of uncertainty in the engineering teams. For months, progress slowed to a crawl. The project's future hung in the balance, with no clear solution in sight. COMAC's leadership faced an existential question: press forward alone, or risk abandoning the most ambitious civil aviation project in China's history? The answer would demand an all-in gamble, with the eyes of the global aviation industry watching closely. On November 2024, Air China's board convened for what insiders would later describe as the most consequential fleet decision in the airline's history. The outcome? A framework agreement to become the world's first operator of the COMAC C929. The deal was signed in Beijing, under the close watch of government liaisons and senior party officials. No prototype had yet flown. Certification was still years away, yet the airline committed, publicly, to a jet whose future was anything but certain. This was not a typical commercial order. Internal accounts from those briefed on the meeting point to a debate shaped less by technical metrics and more by national strategy. The board weighed the risks of betting on an unfinished aircraft against the imperative to secure China's aviation independence. Reports in financial journals describe a heated exchange, with government representatives pressing the case that this was a now or never moment, a chance to anchor the country's future in its own hands, rather than rely on Western suppliers vulnerable to sanctions or shifting political winds. The announcement sent a clear message to the global industry. Air China's early commitment put political calculation ahead of short-term operational certainty. Aviation analysts noted that such a move, ordering a wide-body before certification, was almost unheard of outside the Soviet era. Yet for Air China, the calculus extended beyond fleet renewal. The C929 was to become a symbol of resilience, a hedge against the kind of supply chain shocks that had crippled Russian airlines after Crimea, and a direct answer to the delivery drought that had left dozens of Boeing and Airbus orders in limbo. Just 3 months later, on February 24, 2025, COMAC issued a statement claiming the C929 had reached a new phase, static and preliminary systems testing, with design now declared fully independent in intellectual property. Western observers who had grown skeptical after Russia's exit were caught off guard by the speed and confidence of the announcement. While no independent verification of flight testing or prototype rollout surfaced, the declaration alone was enough to reignite debate about China's ability to deliver a world-class widebody on its own terms. For Air China's leadership, the public reveal was both a validation and a gamble. The airline had staked its reputation on a domestic aircraft whose technical maturity remained unproven. Yet the political logic was inescapable. In a world where sanctions could ground entire fleets overnight, aligning with COMAC offered a path to a sanctions-proof supply chain and a seat at the table for shaping the future of Chinese aviation. The C929 order was less a leap of faith than a calculated assertion of national ambition, one that would force both supporters and skeptics to reassess what was possible in the global aerospace market. Engineers at COMAC set out to build a jet that could stand beside the world's best, not just in range or efficiency, but in the experience it offers every passenger. The C929 is designed to seat 280 travelers in a standard 3-class layout, with flexibility to stretch that number on high-density routes. Its range, 12,000 kilometers, puts nonstop flights like Beijing to New York or Shanghai to London within easy reach, matching the intercontinental ambitions of China's largest airlines. What sets the C929 apart is its approach to comfort. The cabin measures 5.5 meters across, wider than either the Boeing 787 or Airbus A350. That extra width translates directly into broader seats, wider aisles, and a noticeably more open feeling, especially on flights that can last 15 hours or more. COMAC's design teams have emphasized this difference at trade shows, using cabin mock-ups and virtual reality tours to highlight the extra elbow room and less claustrophobic layout. For passengers, the result is a space that feels less like a narrow tube and more like a true long-haul flagship. Half of the C929's structure is built from advanced carbon fiber composites, a leap that puts it on equal footing with the latest Western jets. This material choice reduces weight, improves fuel efficiency, and allows for larger windows and higher cabin humidity. features that matter on ultra-long-haul journeys. With over 2 million individual components and thousands of subassemblies, the aircraft's complexity rivals anything in the industry. Every detail, from the overhead bins to the underfloor cargo holds, is engineered to meet or exceed international standards for comfort, reliability, and performance. For COMAC engineers, the C929 is more than a technical achievement. It's a statement that China can compete on quality, not just price. Even as COMAC's C929 design reached new milestones, a stubborn reality lingered beneath the surface. The aircraft's most vital systems, avionics, landing gear, power management, and even flight controls, remained anchored to Western suppliers. Agreements signed with Safran and Crane Company at the Paris Air Show confirmed that, for all the talk of independence, the C929's operational heart still beat to the rhythm of export licenses and foreign technology. At least half a dozen critical systems, from cockpit electronics to wheels and brakes, would still be sourced from Europe or the US when the first prototype rolled out. For every advance in composite manufacturing or cabin design, a single denied export license could still ground the program overnight. Inside the Aero Engine Corporation of China, a different story was taking shape. The AECC engineering teams, many drawn from the CJ1000A narrow-body engine project, had spent years working in isolation, shielded from outside scrutiny. Their task was clear: break the last and most dangerous link in the dependency chain. The result was the CJ2000, a high-bypass turbofan built entirely on Chinese soil. With a thrust rating of 35 tons and a claimed 5 to 7% advantage in fuel efficiency over the Rolls-Royce Trent 1000 and GE GNX, the CJ2000 promised to do what no Chinese engine had managed before: power a wide-body jet without Western help. AECC's engineers faced daunting technical hurdles: composite fan blades, high-temperature superalloys, and advanced pressure ratios all had to be mastered from scratch. Ground tests began behind closed doors in Shanghai, with security so tight that even international contractors surrendered their phones at the gate. By mid-2025, the CJ2000 had completed its first full-scale heat runs, with early data suggesting it could match Western benchmarks for thrust and efficiency. While the engine would still need years of flight testing and certification, its existence alone changed the calculus. For the first time, COMAC could plausibly claim a pathway to a truly independent widebody, if, and only if, the CJ2000 lived up to its promise. Certification stands as the defining hurdle for the C929's future beyond China's borders. Aviation regulators in Europe and the United States, EASA and the FAA, set the global benchmarks for safety, reliability, and technical documentation. Both have a long history of scrutinizing new entrants, and their standards have only tightened after recent high-profile safety crises. For the C929, this means every system, from flight controls to cabin software, must clear a labyrinth of audits, documentation reviews, and flight tests. Industry insiders describe a climate of skepticism among Western regulators, with concerns focused on software traceability, supply chain transparency, and the robustness of Chinese quality controls. COMAC's public statements target Chinese certification by 2032, with ambitions for international approval soon after. But analysts point to the C919's protracted path to global acceptance as a cautionary tale. The C929's reliance on Western components, especially in avionics and power management, adds another layer of complexity, as export license reviews can stall or even reverse progress overnight. Behind the scenes, lobbyists for Boeing and Airbus have urged regulators to apply maximum scrutiny, arguing that the integrity of global safety standards is at stake. Meeting logs and industry briefings reveal a steady drumbeat of concern over documentation gaps, particularly for software-driven systems that underpin modern fly-by-wire jets. None of this has slowed the flow of state financing into the C929 program. Funding now exceeds the levels seen during the C919's development by more than half, drawing on central government grants, state bank loans, and municipal bonds earmarked for strategic technology. Some of this support is channeled through military-civil fusion initiatives, reflecting the aircraft's symbolic importance. For COMAC, the stakes are clear. Certification is not just a technical milestone, but a gateway to the global market. If the C929 achieves it, the long-standing duopoly could face its first real challenger in a generation. If not, the program risks being confined to domestic skies, an expensive symbol of ambition, but not of global reach. In November 2024, Air China placed the first-ever order for the COMAC C929 before the aircraft was certified, a move that signaled a major shift in the global aviation landscape. Documents confirm that the C929, with its 280-passenger capacity and 12,000-kilometer range, matches the technical benchmarks of Boeing and Airbus's best-selling wide-bodies. Yet despite China's announcement of independent flight testing in February 2025, no external sources have verified a completed first flight. The program's reliance on Western components remains a critical vulnerability, even as the new CJ2000 engine promises to eliminate that dependency. What happens next depends on certification outcomes and the ability to scale domestic production. For now, the evidence shows that the C929, if successful, poses the first real challenge to the Boeing Airbus duopoly in decades. The story of the C929 is unfinished, but its impact on the balance of power in global aviation is already undeniable.